Okay, so this video is about the poem Like Riding a Bicycle by George Bilgere, who is a contemporary poet. He lives and writes in Ohio, in Cleveland, Ohio. He's an English professor there. Um, he's won the Pushcart Prize. His collections have been awarded prizes by Billy Collins. He's a very accessible poet, and I think that's what people appreciate about him. So we'll read this poem, and then we'll talk a little bit about the poem and the the benefits of accessible poetry. I couldn't find a recording of Bilgere reading his own poem, so I'll read it before we begin. Like riding a bicycle. I would like to write a poem about how my father taught me to ride a bicycle one soft twilight. A poem in which he was tired and I was scared, unable to disbelieve in gravity and believe in him. As the fireflies were coming out and only enough light remained for one more run, his big hand at the small of my back, pulling away like the gantry at a missile launch, and this time I wobbled into flight, caught a balance I would never lose, and pulled away from him as he eased, laughing at a stop. A poem in which I said that even today, as I make some perilous adult launch, like pulling away from my wife into the fragile new balance of our life apart, I can still feel that steadying hand, still hear that strong voice telling me to embrace the sweet fall forward into the future's blue equilibrium. But of course, he was drunk that night, still wearing his white shirt and tie from the office, the air around us sick with scotch, and the challenge was keeping his own balance as he coaxed his bulk into a trot beside me in the hot night, sweat soaking his armpits. The eternal flame of his cigarette flared as he gasped, and I fell again and again, entangled in my gleaming Schwinn, until he swore and stomped off into the house to continue working with my mother on their own divorce, their balance long gone, and the hard ground already rising up to smite them. While I stayed outside in the dark, still falling, until at last I wobbled into the frail, upright delight of feeling sorry for myself. Riding alone down the neighborhood's black street, like the lonely Western hero I still catch myself in the act of performing. And yet, having said all this, I must also say that this summer evening is very beautiful, and I am older than my father ever was as I coast the Pacific shoreline on my old bike, the gears clicking like years, the wind touching me for the first time, it seems, in a very long time, with soft urgency all over. Such a bittersweet poem, such a sad poem. Um, I would like to write a poem about how my father taught me to ride a bicycle. And so the first stanza is what he fantasizes, what everybody wants the experience to be like. His patient, proud father, the fireflies outside, slowly, with his hand on the small of his back, guiding him until he was able to pedal on his own. And then the second stanza is the reality of what that night was like. Instead of being pleasantly warm, it was hot and sticky. Instead of being patient and proud, his father was drunk and frustrated and went in the house before the boy even learned to ride the bike on his own. And so finally, when he did get his balance and take off down the street, it was on his own. His father was already in the house. And then along with this narrative about his father teaching him to ride a bike, and all that encapsulates about their relationship and his childhood, there's also the intertwining of another painful time in the poet's life, that he's going through a divorce at this time. Bilgere has said before in interviews that the divorce came at the end of the school semester. And so, he had 3 months at home by himself, without the distraction of work, to really sort of stew on this painful time in his life. And so all of this came up together, the hot night many years ago when his father and his mother were going through their own divorce, um, the painful and disappointing memory of his father trying to teach him how to ride a bicycle, and how he failed at that. And it's all sort of wrapped up together in the poet's mind at this point. Um, I said before that Bilgere is a really accessible poet, meaning that you don't have to work too hard to find meaning in his work. It's very narrative. We know what's happening. We can hear the speaker in the poem. Um, we know that as an adult he's looking back and wishing that his life had been a certain way, that his father's life had been a certain way, because we find out at the end of the poem that his father didn't even live into old age. And so these painful childhood memories are some of the only memories that Bilgere had of his father. They never had the opportunity to be men together and to sort of maybe reconcile or see if his father would have changed over the years. But don't mistake accessibility or simplicity for that there's not an artistry or a craft here. I think poems like this are deceptively simple because we get them. The first reading, we're like, oh, I know what's happening in this poem. I can see it all. I can feel it. The feelings, you don't have to dig deep to understand what the poet is saying and how the poet feels. But there's still so much, so many layers in the poem, even though it seems like it may not be very deep. If you go back through it and read it over and over again, you'll see, the striking imagery, the similes, the symbolism, the way he creates one very vivid scene in the first stanza and then another very vivid scene in the second stanza, using this sort of the same scenario, but just playing it back in a different way. Like we said, the first scene, it's warm and twilighty and the fireflies are out. The second stanza, it's hot and dark. The language is just rich, and the words have like so many meanings to them. Again, even though they seem simple and the denotation of the word is simple, pulling away and apart, the repetition of those words throughout the poem, both in his father's marriage and his own marriage, and then of course in the image of when his father is teaching him to ride a bike. At first they're connected, the father is running beside him, and then eventually the child starts taking off by himself, and that separation that begins in really early childhood, and that we work on in different ways, that push and pull between relying on your parent and pulling away from your parent, that takes place throughout your whole childhood, maybe even throughout your whole life, as long as your parents are still with you. Knowing his father's demons, he was drunk and he smoked and he was overweight, and we know that he didn't live a long life. And as a child, how disappointing this whole experience was. Something that should have been a wonderful memory that he held on for the rest of his life, especially since he lost his father young, turned into an ugly evening that ended with his father swearing and leaving and never actually teaching him how to ride a bike. But now also as an adult, understanding on a different level how painful his own father's life might have been, how difficult that divorce might have been, how he may have struggled with loss and isolation, and how he might have dealt with that with alcohol. So as a child, you don't understand that, but as an adult now, especially an adult who's going through a similar situation to something his father went through, having maybe more of an understanding of that. But again, the images of falling over and over again, even just that, and that sticks with me in the first stanza. For one more run, his big hand on the small of my back. That rhetorical play of big and small. He was a large man, and when we talk about the small of his back, that's where your hand would rest if you were trying to help somebody balance a bicycle. But again, the contrast of the big father and the small child, and how I think that was so powerful and obvious to him as a child. His father, this looming, distant figure, and him being this small child trying to make sense of the world on his own, trying to find balance on his own. I also love the rhetorical play of unable to disbelieve in gravity and believe in him. Because taking off on a bicycle is that. It's a leap of faith, and believing that gravity is not going to prevail here, because when you think about balancing yourself on two really thin wheels, you do have to sort of suspend your fears and just believe that it's going to be okay, and you have to put your trust in the person who's helping you when you're first gaining your balance. And um, it was hard, I think, to make that leap for him, to trust that his father's hand would be there to stop him from falling. And as it turns out, it wasn't. He fell over and over again without anybody to break the fall or to help him up again. Um, the play of launching like a missile and then launching out into his own life. There's so many words in this poem that have double meanings and layered meanings and subtle nuances. So, like I said, you read it, you get it, you might think, wow, that was a simple poem. And in one sense it is, and in one sense, that's wonderful. Bilgere, and even, like I said, Billy Collins, who appreciates his poem, is also another very accessible poet. But also brilliant in the way that they can make it look effortless. They can make it look like I just sat down and dashed out this story or this memory about my father teaching me to ride a bike, and there's no effort to it whatsoever, but there's so much effort, and the words are so carefully and precisely crafted. And I think that is something that is amazing to appreciate, that how hard it is to write a simple poem, maybe. So this is definitely a poem that you can read over and over again, and pick up on different nuances and emotions throughout the piece. So I'd like to hear what you think. Do you have a memory of someone teaching you to ride a bike? Do you have memories of your parents that are maybe a little difficult to process sometimes? Do you have memories of your parents going through things that when you were a child you didn't understand, but now as an adult you've been through them yourself and maybe have a better understanding or appreciation of? Just let me know all your thoughts on this beautiful, morose, no, not morose, that's not the word I want. I have a hard time finding words sometimes in these videos, but it's just touching. It's sad and it's bittersweet, but there's also some understanding and clarity, I think, in the poem as well. Let me know what you think.